Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Tell your kids' teachers, the librarian, their principal. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Today we're very excited to welcome back one of our favorite guest hosts, Jordan Sahley. Hey, Jordan.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. I'm your host for today, Jordan, and today we are joined by Kelly Yang, author of Finally Seen. How are you doing today, Kelly?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm really good. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about your book?
Yeah. So Finally Seen is a story of Lena Gao. She is a girl who has just joined her parents in the United States. Her parents came to the U.S. with her little sister from China about 5 years ago. And this whole time, Lena has been in Beijing with her grandmother, just waiting by the phone, just waiting for the phone to ring, for her mom to say, it's okay for you to come over too. And 1 month turns into 1 year, turns into 5 years, and she's like super anxious to come over. Finally, she gets the call, and that's where the book starts. So she's coming over in a very unconventional way, and she's bringing over a lot of emotion. You know, she's angry. She's really upset that she's been left behind all these years. She's confused, but she's also relieved to be with her family again. And so it's about her finding her place in her new country, in her new school, and in her new family.
Mm-hmm. What inspired you to write this? Do you feel like you relate to her in any way?
Absolutely. So my parents and I immigrated to this country when I was 6 years old. And I grew up kind of like Lena, struggling to find my footing at school, trying to find my voice, wondering at times if I was going to ever be able to accomplish that. I've also had to experience periods of separation from my kids as a mother. During the pandemic, our family was kind of all over the place. Some of us were here in the U.S., some of us were in Hong Kong. So I've personally understand the toll that it takes sometimes on a kid, having those periods of family separation and just wondering if you're ever going to be united again. And then the other emotional connection I have is that Lena finally feels seen through a book that she loves more than any other book in the world. It's a book also about a Chinese American immigrant, and she feels seen by this book. This book opens up all kinds of, different opportunities for her. She's finally finding confidence again, but that book gets challenged in her school. And that's something I've had to go through as an author. My first book, Front Desk, is a beloved children's book. It's won many, many awards, so many different state lists. And it's about the immigrant experience. And it's also based on my childhood growing up and managing a motel as a kid with my parents. Unfortunately, that book was challenged in many different school districts all across the country, as we've seen happen, which is, we're seeing unprecedented numbers of book banning. And that was something that was really important for me to talk about, because we all need to understand what's at stake here when that happens.
Mm-hmm. Of course. Were there any books that inspired you when you were younger, the way that this book talks about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really inspired by Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred Taylor. That was probably my favorite book growing up, in terms of a book where I felt really seen. It wasn't about the Asian American experience, but it was something that talked very honestly about hard issues, about struggling, about, poverty, about discrimination. And these were things that I was going through, but I never dared talk about with anyone at school. So I just had to kind of put up with it silently. And that book really opened my eyes in terms of, maybe you're not alone in the world. Maybe there are people who've also gone through it, and you can maybe talk about it. with other people and feel less alone. So that's why it's so important that we have these books, which we call, mirrors and windows for kids, so they can see themselves reflected.
Of course. Yeah, it is such a shame seeing so many books get banned that are so relatable. I know a lot of LGBT books are getting banned in Florida and stuff. Where was your book banned or attempted to be?
Yeah, so my book has been banned in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Nevada. I mean, I can't even keep track now. However, a lot of times they do get overturned if there's enough support from the community, or if there's just enough voices, really. And that's what this book is really about. It's, we know that the people who want to ban books, they're very loud, but we can be even louder. But we have to really understand why it's so important that we speak up, why it's so important that we don't just sit passively by while this happens.
Sorry. Do you suspect that this book is going to be banned as well?
I mean, I don't know. But honestly, my job is not to really think about that. I just write the best book that I can about what's currently going on. And I'm very honest with kids about what, current events are happening. And it's a way for them to kind of understand the world. And it kind of explains book banning. A lot of people have no idea how it happens. It happens in communities all over the place, not just in Florida, not just in Texas. It can happen in any community. And which is why we have to, as a community, talk about these issues. We can't just pretend that they're never going to affect us or happen, because they might happen right on our, right next door.
You also talked about growing up and helping run a motel. What was that like?
Yeah, so that is a amazing experience and lots of ups and downs, which are chronicled through the Front Desk series. You can read all about it in the Front Desk series. But basically, yeah, it was hard. It was hard as a kid. I had to get adults to take me seriously. I had to do a lot of customer service and problem solving. There were some very real moments because the motel was in an area which was high crime. So we had a lot of different incidences happen, and those were heartbreaking sometimes. And as a kid, just never reading about that, right? I read a lot of series. I read a lot of different books like Babysitter's Club and Goosebumps and, I don't know, Beverly Clearly, but I never really saw my problems reflected in those books. You know what I mean? They were all great other problems to have, but they weren't my problems. No one in those books ever really wondered whether their parents were going to have to pay for the hospital bill, and the fact that they didn't have insurance might actually kill them. That was something that growing up I had to worry about. Growing up, we had to worry about putting food on the table and, whether things were actually affordable at the grocery store because prices were so high, or whether we could have enough gas. So I really wanted, when I'm writing a book, to reflect the world around me, to reflect current times. Finally Seen is taking place right after the pandemic. And the characters in the book, Lena's parents, are really worried about paying back the pandemic back rent that they owe to their landlord for their apartment, because all of the rent laws are changing and now they owe all this money back. That's a very real reality a lot of people are going through. Just, what am I going to do? How am I going to come up with this money? There's no rent freeze anymore. And that's something that they have to figure out as a family. So I really want to reflect all of that.
Oh, I'm sure this book is going to hit home for a lot of kids, which is so nice. I also saw that you graduated high school at the age of 13. Is that true?
So I did skip several grades, and I did go to college at a really young age. I went to college when I was 13, and I went to law school when I was 17. So I had a very unconventional route there as well. And I would say that it was also a very isolating experience, because emotionally you're sort of on a different track from all your friends. even though intellectually you might be on the same track. And that was another thing that I had to just figure out. And I don't recommend it for kids for that reason. I think there's so many other ways to accelerate these days and not feel so isolated. So I don't recommend that, but it is something that for whatever reason happened to me.
Yeah. What made you switch from law to writing?
That's a great question. So I went to college so young that by the time I got through law school, I was only 20, and I had experienced a little bit of corporate law, just having been a summer associate. And from the little bit that I experienced, I quickly realized that actually was a lot of grueling work, that it was going to be very intense, and I would probably not have time to write my creative stories, which is really what got me to law school in the first place, is I love writing. But the kind of writing you do as a lawyer is very different from the kind of writing you do as a novelist. You know, you can't just make stuff up. I'm pretty sure you would be disbarred for that. So I took a chance. I remember going to my law firm and saying, hey, I have this crazy idea. I want to teach kids writing. I don't know if I'm going to be good at it. I don't have I don't have a teaching credential, but I found a couple of international schools in Hong Kong that were willing to let me give it a shot. And I said to them, can I just try it for a year? And they said, okay, I guess so. And just come back in a year once you have all that teaching out of your system. Well, 1 year turned into 15 years that I was a teacher, and I taught kids writing. And during this whole time, I was also writing for the newspaper. I was commentating on TV, different issues that were happening in Hong Kong. I had this amazing international experience living overseas, reconnecting with my Asian roots. I started a family, became a mother, and really when my oldest son was 8 years old, I realized that he had never learned about my childhood growing up in the motel, because that's how isolating it feels when you never see yourself represented in a book. You literally just go through your whole life never telling anyone anything about you. And when I became a mom and my oldest kid was 8, it just hit me. Like, what am I doing? How can I not tell my own kids how I grew up? Like, that's terrible, right? That's such a shame, because the way I grew up was amazing and I should be proud. I got adults to give me their credit cards. So decided when he was 8 that I was going to sit down that summer and write a book. And that book became Front Desk, which led to more books. And here I am. But that's sort of the long story of how I got here from law school.
When you write your stories, do you think you write your kids into any of the stories, or do you write them more for your kids?
A little bit of both. I'm the person on family road trips where if somebody says something funny, I whip out my iPhone. I'm like, wait a minute, let me just write that down. And they're like, no. You just let me make one joke and not have it end up somewhere. I'm trying to get better at that. So I do want to respect that. But sometimes what happens is they'll be going through something and it'll really inspire me, right? So in finally seeing the fact that she was separated from her parents for so long, that was inspired by my son Tilden, who was separated from me for 7 months. And that's because I had to take care of my mom and get her through chemo. She had cancer, and I didn't know how to do that in the U.S. while I was also doing virtual school with 3 kids. So I ended up just only being able to bring my daughter over to the U.S. with me. And we got my mom through chemo. She's doing great, which is like fantastic. I mean, knock on wood.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole time, Tilden and Elliot were sitting in Hong Kong with my husband, kind of just going, when are we going to be reunited again? Like, why did I get left behind? And battling all those emotions that Lena has to go through.
Were you able to have like good conversations with your kids about these feelings, or did it have to wait till after?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard when you're in the moment to have these conversations, just because long distance and calling people, especially teenage boys, and talking about your feelings on the phone,
Mm-hmm.
It's really challenging, right? You know, if for any parent with teenage boys or tween boys will tell you they don't always open up on the phone. But once they were here, we had to do a lot of therapy. You know, we had a lot to unpack. And I realized that it took a huge toll on them.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys do family therapy or individual therapy?
We do individual therapy. So I will go with my kids to therapist appointments. It's really mostly been Tilden who's had a lot of these issues just trying to figure out. And I think he and I have had the hardest time with our relationship because we were separated for the longest period. I mean, I'm just being honest, it did take a huge toll. And it's something that I had to own up to. You know, I saved my mom, but it took a really big toll on the rest of my family. But it's something that we figure out as a family together, you know, and sometimes that's what being a family is. It's making tough choices sometimes.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is like the importance of talking about mental health with kids, and at what age do you think it's okay to start having those conversations?
Oh, I think that at every age, it's important to have those conversations, because I think that one of the problems we have right now as a society is we have so much overexposure to success, right? I mean, everybody's constantly posting their highlights, and that makes kids think that that is so natural and expected and normal, when the daily struggle is really what they're going to be facing when they grow up. Life is just not constant highlights every single day. You know, I have high moments, but I have low moments. And that's something that we need to normalize talking about, because then kids don't expect that that's going to happen to them and get depressed or disappointed or feel like they did something wrong if they don't have constant streams of success. So that's something I try to talk about, you know, all the time with my kids. I rave about my failures as much as I rave about the things that happened that were pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Weirdly enough, seeing like people fail is the most inspiring thing for you as a kid. 'Cause it's like, okay, I can mess this up and it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Or even just, you know, like we talk about cancer all the time because my family's had to go through that. But cancer has opened up a lot of opportunities too, because, you know, moved us to LA, where we finally, you know, get to live in a house and have a lot of these experiences that my kids always wanted to have instead of living in Hong Kong. You know, they get to go to the school that they want and pursue music or pursue sports. So we try to talk about things in a very balanced way and seeing like there's this terrible thing that happened to our family. It was heartbreaking. It was really hard, but we tried as hard as we can to fight it. And in the process, we also opened ourselves up to a lot of the joy.
Mm-hmm. What kind of lessons do you think parents can talk to their kids about when reading your book with them?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that I want parents to talk about with their kids is what they're going through at school, and not just take like school, everything's fine for an answer, but really dig into what's been going on, right? What are the other kids talking about? Sometimes you'd be surprised at what kids are processing or what kids are going through. And we need to be inviting them to those conversations. We need to also talk about what it means to walk in someone else's shoes for a minute, like through books, right? Through conversations, through making friends with people from a different culture. This is all going to prepare our kids so much for the future, because we know the future is diverse. Right? We know that. I mean, even today is diverse, right? So if we know that the future is diverse, we have to really embrace it and make sure that our kids are prepared for it, and by having that empathy. And I think books is such a great tool to use to drive that empathy.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Well, it looks like we're reaching the end of our time. So do you have any last messages you want to leave for our audience?
I just really hope you guys enjoy the book. I hope that it empowers you. I hope that you're inspired to tell your school librarian that you want your kids to read books about people from different cultures, people from all walks of life, books about history, books about current events. We need to be louder than the people who are trying to ban books. And I hope that it inspires all of us to choose a future where we're all finally seen.
And if someone wanted to find your work or learn more about you, where could they go to do that?
They could go to my website, kellyyang.com. They could follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I'm kellyyang.edu.hk. You can watch me and try to, do ridiculous dance videos and feel myself. But yeah, you can follow me on social.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And thank you to everybody for listening today. Definitely go check out Kelly Yang after this. And we will see you all tomorrow for the next episode.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And we hope that you'll join us for the next exciting episode of the show. To make sure you don't miss a moment of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Big thanks going out to my teams, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Sahley, Will Cheever, Cassandra Masonet, Stephanie Davila. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.